Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better For Worse.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Let us know you're out there today. We're going to be talking about distractions in the environment. As the weather gets warmed up, we decided this would be a really good topic to chat about and kind of give everybody pointers on how to deal with the great outdoors for your dogs. So if you're having, please feel free to ask questions and we'll try to answer them as best we can. But one of the things we want to definitely talk about is how do you handle it and it depends on quite a lot of things and it takes time. And there's so much to it that we're going to try to cover as much as we can in the little time that we have. Hi, Sue. And Sue has a young puppy, so she knows all about it. Anyway, one of the things, especially in the winter, some of us don't go for walks on a regular basis, or we don't spend time outside, or they're not around, we don't go for walks as often. And then when you do go for walks in the warm weather, then all hell breaks loose. So that's one of the things we want to kind of talk to you about. As the weather warms up, we can start working on things before they become a issue or a problem. Oh, Karen's wearing her squirrel t-shirt. Yeah, well, that's kind of the what do you call it? The theme for the day. So anyway, and distractions and outside. I'm going to be a little bit specific, and Joanne and Lisa can jump in. We're talking about outside, going for walks, and going, being out in the world. Whether it's a walk or out in the yard or things like that. So that's specifically what we're talking about for different environmental distractions, is specifically what we're going to discuss today. Okay. Even though that might include in some cases dogs and people, but a lot of the handling of it is the same. So that's, just wanted to make sure we're specifically addressing those things. So how many of you I see a few of you that are tuned in have young dogs. Susan, Ronnie, Sue has a young Vishla. So the age does have a little bit to do with how would you would handle it and what the dogs are going to do when they're the young dogs versus a little more mature or excitable dogs. So it's a little bit different, right? So Joanne has had an experience today with distraction in the great outdoors. Let's hear about it.
Here comes the bus. Thanks, Nance. So, it was so funny. So there's a really big field where I used to go to school and I used to rent to teach. So every once in a while, if it's a really nice day, it's like a 10-acre grassy field. So I'll go and I'll take the chucket and I'll throw the ball. And the good dog. So Noah, he is a good dog. he is a good dog. He's not super interested in the ball. I mean, he likes it. He'll play a couple of times, where my other two are kind of ball crazy. So they'll play fetch till they can't run anymore. And so, I kind of let him out, and I'm okay letting him out to have a little bit of freedom, right? So if you want to run off and sniff some things and do that, I'm okay with that. That's part of, to me, I think it's giving the dog a little bit of what they enjoy doing, because he does like to sniff. He is that kind of a dog. But of course I call, right? All right, come on, buddy, come this way. And he was like, can't hear you. And he's like, come here, right? And I called 3 times and he has given me nothing. So of course I'm walking across this enormous field to get him. And of course, and then he poops. So I'm like, oh. So I'm like reaching down to pick up his poop, and he takes off the other 10 acres of the field. So I'm like, at this point, he's not listening at all. So I finally get to him, and he tried to run again. And I was like, sit. And he sat, and I was like, good dog. But I grabbed his collar, and I was like, you're done. You're done. You lost all your privileges. If you cannot listen, I'm sorry. No more playing for you. And so he got to sit in the car.
Was he sniffing?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the one, so where he first went off to, he was sniffing, and then guess what? Ran up the tree. So I think it was like the squirrel just was kind of all over, but it was a lot of the smell. So that area has a lot of deer that come through it. There are a lot of people who kind of run their dogs, like they walk their dogs, a lot of people through that area. And so I'm sure he was just, reading the newspaper and checking everything out, which again, I don't mind. If you would have come when I called you, I would have released you back to go do what you wanted to do, right? But nope, if you can't listen, that's to me one of the biggest things, right? If you are going to be non-compliant and I'm trying to give you freedom, you lose your freedom, right?
Yep.
And typically, Nana is very obedient that way. So you see what I mean? And this, it's a really good, because typically that is not the norm for this dog. He's usually pretty attentive and very focused on Joanne, but because she hasn't had a chance to do that very often, and it's sometimes it get a little bit forgetful, which is why I wanted to talk about it and address it and discuss it a little bit more. Lisa, do you have anything? So, and even still in the beginning, usually when we first work on this out with my dogs outside, I usually have them on a long line just to remind them that they have to come. Because even and Noah's a really good dog, and he's still everyone, and that doesn't happen often, but even the most well-trained dogs can sometimes go, maybe no, right? Even though it happens maybe once every blue moon, right? That and it wasn't a terrible problem. It's likely he ran off and never to be seen again. He was just doing his own thing, right?
I think also too, it's like temperament driven and then age driven as well, right? So like the puppies at a very young age, they do stay close. They don't wander off. And then everyone's like, oh, that's great. They won't do it anymore. And then they turn into teenagers. And then people are more apt to be like, oh, yeah. I'm like, don't get attached. That changes depending, right? And then like right now, well, he's more of an independent little breed. This guy got the Pomsky again. And he doesn't care. He's super confident. There's temperament, right? So an independent breed specific. And then he's just like, piss off. I got my own stuff to do. And he'll kind of putter off doing his thing. So, and then if you throw another dog in, he is very dog social. He likes people. He'll leave me for people too. So it's something that we're working on for him, just because I know it's potentially going to be an issue. I mean, the owners don't have a fence right now. So, and I don't know if they're going to get one, but he gets very distracted and then he'll be willing to take off. But Suzanne's follow me game is something I do in the yard with my dogs. And then, with the yard I have or the amount of space we have, we'll still do the same thing. But yeah, I do a long line just because, for safety purposes, and then, for the most part, that's him screaming, by the way, sorry. But for the most part, like my guys are pretty good with it, but we've been accustomed to doing it various locations, right? So generalizing numerous places and, getting them to understand the follow me and then eye contact and the ability to split attention, those types of things. So,
right. And me personally, my lab has a really, really good recall. I don't worry about it so much. My shepherd does too, but he'll have Noah moments like that, right? He knows better, but if it's like some hot chick passing by or another dog, he's going to go visit it. So I don't feel he's as reliable as I would like him to be. Granted, I haven't tested it in a long time, but he'll tend to be like, and he's not independent. So the only thing where Noah's a Vizsla, so he's a hunting dog, so he can be a little more independent. The shepherd, if I start to walk away, will immediately stop that.
Don't leave me, I love you.
Exactly, don't leave me. But that's again going back to Lisa's point, temperament. And the interesting thing is Noah is very much a mommy's dog for sure. And he's still like, this was a good smell. And the smells now that are coming up and all the animals around, you're going to have that, those issues with your dogs, right? Because it's great smells. It's good to see what's going on and all that stuff. So, and you want to give them that permission. So we're going to talk, and a couple of them are Suzanne's things that we use, or I have used personally, and I don't know, and I know Lisa and Joanne have as well. And we'll kind of give you some tips on working it. So before I have a very, very short PowerPoint presentation to talk about it. But before you want to definitely, especially those of you with the young dogs and adolescent dogs, you really want to break it down into very small pieces. We tend to want to lump it and have it, take them to a rave and have them come to you versus
my border collie would have a great time at the rave.
versus having it like in Joanne's case, in a quieter environment, things like that, where there's not a lot of stuff going on. She's very careful about that stuff, right? For obvious reasons. But working in a more at a low level, distractions outside is really key to success, right? To be able to do it right. As the dogs are a little older, they should be able to handle more, and they have a little bit more of or like my shepherd also likes balls. So a ball would definitely trump everything else. So if I had that, but I also don't want to use them as a bribe. Like Joanne, Tango, and Fire, they like to play ball. So as long as they're engaged playing ball with you, nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. Versus, other dogs that might be interested in, there's a squirrel or whatever it is. Okay. So we're going to talk about, and actually we'll each take a section because my eyes are tired today. I don't know why.
It's called age.
Maybe you should hold the computer a little farther away.
I know, right? It's like oh no, that's not it. Wow, this has a new feature. It's so cool.
Why am I so white?
It's very, very cool. Neato.
Did you just have a visitor? Oh. Okay. So I know, like, for me too. Oh, you have it right. So using the ball for me was a good way because they're so focused on the ball, right? To make them do some things, right? To focus before you throw the ball again. And I think sometimes when you have something like that they're so focused on, they don't care where they are. But still a good place to test environments.
So do you see the slideshow?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So to start and this is to start with working distractions. This is what we use to get started, as well as and we build on this, right? But this is the basic. These three things are the basic things you want to work on when you're trying to get your dog used to being in a distracted environment or working on we're helping your dog focus. And what happens is most of us want the dogs to be able to just walk in and handle it, especially if you have young dogs, right away. And only dogs will determine when you can move on or make it more challenging, right? So these are the three things, and we'll talk about them. The first one is distance, or how proximity from the stimulus, and it's not really reacting, but interested in how long do you ask them to deal with it, and how intense, right? One dog sitting quietly or 2 or 3 dogs playing, right? You want to think about that. Okay, so Joanne, how about you take the distance and proximity part?
Sure. So, the dog will actually kind of tell you how much they need. And so every dog is different, as we know. So I always like to tell people, when you're starting with distance, start farther away than what you think you'll need. Probably double it, right? Because what you think your dog can handle versus what they can actually handle, you don't want to set them up for failure in the very beginning. So, dealing with something like a squirrel, right? You might need to be a football field away if you have a really prey-driven dog. If you have a dog that doesn't care so much and just likes to watch the movement, maybe it can be across the backyard. The thing you want to remember though with the stimulus gradient and all of these, right, is can the dog split their attention? So when you talk about distance, if you are a football field away and that squirrel's trotting across the field, right, and the dog doesn't even remember that you are on the other end of the leash, you're too close. Okay. Even though it seems like they should be able to handle something that's that far away, they are telling you that they can't. So again, the dog gets to set the distance by telling you, I can notice that thing and I can pay attention to you.
Right. And space, as Joanne alluded to, space is a big deal for dogs, right?
Mhm.
What she says is absolutely right. If you think that the distance is enough, you're not. If the dog tells you it can't handle it, you need to honor it, because a lot of times this is not that, it's not that close to you, but to the dog it's a big deal, right? And when we talk about split his attention, we're talking about a dog that can look away and then come back to you relatively smoothly, not the dog's really fixated and is having trouble coming back to you. So it really it's very specific what it looks like, right?
Yeah. So I would say, right, if the squirrel's gone and then they look back at you, not what you're looking for, right? So the stimulus, whatever it is, has to still be present for the dog to split their attention.
Right. And the other thing is different stimulus, like they might be able to be like, I don't care about the squirrel, but another dog might be a different story, right?
Yep.
Or maybe, I don't know, a bird is so everything is it's different. So don't assume because he can be 2 feet away from a squirrel and let it go that he's going to be okay doing that with everything else. That's not it.
Yep. And so Laura, the optimal proximity is not always the same, and the dog can actually change that every 10 seconds, right? I'm cool, I'm not cool. That's a red squirrel instead of a black squirrel. Oh, I can't handle that, right? So things can look different to dogs.
Right.
So like tonight, I have this little guy, and so tonight I brought him to do a class. I was doing a class, and I brought him in, and he was okay. He was able to handle it. He was able to split attention with a person, but then a dog just walked into the store and he lost his mind. And I'm like, okay, we're done. Therefore, exit dog, right? So I knew I couldn't get anything from him. And was he taking treats? Yes, but he'd take a cookie and he'd zip right back to the dog. So that fast motion is something that you also want to pay attention to, because he's not able to sustain it in a thoughtful manner. And I think that's the really important thing to point out as well.
Yeah. Hey, while you're at it, Lisa, why don't you talk about duration? Because you're pretty good about not pushing that hard. I can be a pusher.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I do, and then I'm like, okay, too much. But I think like how long the dog's able to handle that. So like, and Elise talked about her tone of voice. That you know what? No, I mean, to me, I'm not really saying anything. So I think let's step back a minute and remember one of the things we're talking about is the auto check-in, right? The ability to split attention. Can you check in with me and say, hey, what are you doing? Do you care about this? This is interesting, and so forth. So the ability to go back and forth, but it's not going to be a ping pong or a tennis match, right? Or a ping pong match. You're not going to be doing this. This is too much. And that is not effective. It's not a learning moment. It is, you're pushing. So when I start seeing the dogs start to flip their attention pretty quickly like that, I'm more apt to step away and say, we need more proximity, or, you know what, let's take a break. Let's step away. Let's reintroduce it again in a moment. Let's see if you can gather your thoughts about it and then recover from it and then go ahead and redo this again. So tonight, for example, I had a puppy class, and there was a Belgian Malinois in it, and then there was a Labrador in it who was extremely food driven. I know, shocking, right?
Oh my God, I never heard of such a thing.
I know, right? And then there was another dog that was a Vizsla, and it was so crazy because I had different levels, right? And so I was like, okay, we're going to work on distractions. And so because I mean, ultimately everything comes down to a connection with your dog. Can your dog split attention? So your eye contact's critical. To me, that's the foundation of all your training. If you don't have a dog who's willing to split attention, you have nothing to work with. It's better talking to a rock or a wall, right? Or a husband, for those of us who have one. But any hoodles, anyway. So I had, the dogs were there, and I took out a squeaky, and and then I took out it was a freeze dried duck neck. I'm torturous, right? So I'm like, are you olfactory? Are you visual? Are you auditory? So I start looking at that, and I'm like, okay. What caught my attention was the Malinois was like what was it? The Labrador had a squeaky toy, and the Malinois was like, "What?" and turns and looks at that toy, and had a hard time splitting attention, right? So then I was like, "Oh, note to self, let's play with that." So I pulled out a squeaky toy, because we're at Wolf Life and Valparaiso, and so I started taking things and like messing with the dogs and all that, and they did pretty well with it. I was really surprised. And we're in week 4. And they were able to split attention, because I pounded in how important it was to have that, to be able to split attention with different things. So, I was squeaking from across the room, and the Malinois was like, oh, Dad, what are you doing? And the funniest thing I think is so cool about it is that, like, when you're working on distraction, they'll kind of look at the distraction. So like if you have something here, they'll kind of look at it, and you'll almost see like the wheels rolling and the smoke coming out of the ears. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, what? And in that moment cracks me up every single time, because the dog, you could see the dog's processing. And then the people are like, oh my God, they did it, and that to me is probably like one of the most rewarding pieces when you're doing this. But I think what's important is that, and then when I knew that my dog handled that, the next step was then, I pulled away the distraction and then tried to reintroduce it again, and their response was quicker, right? So that is key. And I think, again, a lot of us are pushers, and don't get me wrong, I push as well, but then I'm like, oops, too much, and I back off immediately. So duration is it's really informational in terms of the body language and the ability to go back and forth in a fluid manner, and to be able to say, oh, that's just whatever, right?
And like Lisa said, the younger your dog is, the shorter your work should be.
Yes.
Right. So when Lisa's squeaking the squeaky, she's not squeaking it for 5 minutes. It's only a few seconds for young puppies.
Right.
Yeah.
I did once, and that was enough to like cause them unsettled, and they're like, oh my gosh, what happened? What is she doing? And it took them a little while to recover and remember what they were doing. But then as they started to get into the flow of it, they're like, oh, okay, I get this. And then you switch distraction, right? So.
Right. And so keeping the sessions really short for young puppies, very, very important. Super important. And that's not to say that maybe an older dog that has a little more difficulty with arousal would probably be almost the same as a puppy, right? You wouldn't work them very long anyway,
right?
Because it'd be too hard.
Yeah, and we didn't mention it specifically. I know Nancy mentioned Suzanne, but if you want to know what we're talking about, if you're new to this, it's Suzanne Clothier's auto check-in. Okay, yeah. You should just be able to Google it.
Yeah, and right, and it's and I'll give you a link to her. Give you a link to the Stimulus Gradient handout that you can read on her website. So I will put that in the chat so you guys can check it out. If you have a reactive dog, or you have a young dog, or any dog that you're working through distractions, the Stimulus Gradient is gold. Combined with the auto check-in is also gold. So you want to check that out. All right. And I'll put all that stuff in the chat. So intensity. So once you understand distance and the duration, then you start playing with the intensity. So for example, can your dog handle one dog far away, or a person, or a squirrel, or whatever it is, at a certain distance? Now, can he handle 2 squirrels or 3 squirrels? and you can increase that intensity. And also the speed of movement. Can he handle a squirrel sitting there eating, or two or three squirrels running and playing? If you've ever seen that, it's adorable, but it'll also make a dog crazy, right? And the thing is, and also if and a person moving towards you, and this is what happens sometimes. People start walking towards you and they start moving really slow, which is very creepy, especially to the guardian breeds. So
They'll tell you. They'll tell you how creepy it is.
That's right.
So, and people think they're just being real slow, and it's like they're being so weird that the dog's like, "Okay, psycho."
That
And then-
looks very stalky like. Why are you stalking me?
right.
Which is actually the funniest thing ever, right? Because if you see the guardian breeds, this is really common.
Yep. Are you crazy?
You sure you want to walk over here, buddy?
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the thing, the magic, you guys, is in working the distance. So when you increase distance, let's say when you get closer, you want to decrease how long you do it, right? So, for example, if you're going to work, with a food distractor or whatever, and you're going to put it a little closer to the dog, you're not going to make him deal with it for that much longer once you move it closer. So you want to play with all three of these elements, right? So if you're going to have them leave a steak or another dog, you want to get closer, then you wouldn't do it as long, right? You'd be able to move away, before the dog breaks, right? Because you want to keep them in that learning mode. You have to put a little pressure, and I think that's the difficult part for people, right? They put too much pressure because we want to fix it faster.
Yep.
And a lot of times doing it slower and smaller chunks you'll get much further along. And so the thing to remember is when you change one element, you want to lighten the other two until you get what your desired behavior. And for those of you who have young dogs, they're going to mature when they're going to mature. Mm-hmm. You just got to keep putting in the work, and they're going to grow up when they're going to grow up. You can't speed that up. You just got to put the training in and wait. And the big thing during that young time, like with Sue, with Van, he's a puppy. You don't want him practicing all the bad behavior. So you want to make sure you manage it well and not let him practice bad things while he's growing up and while you're putting the time in. So, and then this is the one that most of us have problems with, right? Let's do just one more rep, see if we can do it. That when you're thinking, I'm going to try it one more time, especially after a really nice, successful one, and I'm going to try to do it again. Don't stop yourself, because that is when it goes bad. And then it's, then the dog just can't do it anymore. And then you're ending on a bad note. So when you have the thought that goes in your mind that says, oh, I should try this again, stop it. Don't. Right. So I'm going to put the,
So I'm gonna counter what you just said, just to make sure. So end on a good note, unless if your dog is starting to lose it, end now, right? Don't hang out and wait. We want to do one more, so we get a good one before we go. Don't do it. Get out of Dodge, man.
That's right. Absolutely.
I also think too, you have to remember who your dog is, right? So if you have a high arousal dog, a dog that has a hard time recovering, that's another consideration. I mean, there's so many components to this. If you really, everyone, I guess, that's why I think I really gravitate towards people who look at who the dog is versus, no, this is how we do it, and this is the method you utilize regardless of. I don't think that's fair. So, if I have a higher arousal dog, less is more, always. But if I have a dog who can bounce back, I might push a little bit. But then if I push too far, if they're resilient and they can bounce back quickly and not stay focused in that level of excitement, then I can be like, whoops, too much, and then step back, go back where we were successful, and then, then let it go, so to speak, make sure they recover. But, I totally agree. I think it totally depends on who the individual is and how far you can push. But less is always more, period.
Yep. And Elise asked a good question. What tone of voice, right? Actually having a more normal conversational tone of voice is best. So that whole be firm. No, but you also don't want to be like, come on, puppy, 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 because you might do it in an emergency, but I think whatever your conversational voice is, I think, and what you normally would use is fine. You don't have to think about, oh, I gotta do this voice. It just as if you're talking to someone else. Like if, let's say, I was, like today I was at I'm in Ohio COing a trial, and I saw a cute little puppy, and I'm like, oh, and if you're trying to get my attention, you might need to say, hey, and you might have to tap me on the shoulder to get my attention, right? That might be a little more that I need, or on a regular voice, but you wouldn't say, hey, Nancy, to get me away from the puppy, right? That would be weird. So it'd be like normal. You'd be like, hey, let's go this way, right? And you'd make sure just like a normal relationship that you would have with anyone.
Right.
So not yelling and not babying. No, just normal. Come here. Joanne is actually really good at that. She's has a very neutral tone all the time with her dogs. And it's like, there's no baby, blah, come on, baby, or not, you know what I mean? If you're going to, well, and if you're going to use a firmer tone, it should be for a really good reason.
Right. Yeah. So Danette had a comment, and I know one of our previous pieces of feedback was not everyone can see all the comments, right? So I'm going to read it. It's a little long. How do you train your husband to help with these things? We have 4.5 acres. My husband thinks Levi should come when he whistles like our previous dogs did. We adopted Levi from LSP 2 years ago. He's approximately 8 years old. All of our previous dogs we got as puppies, and I think it's easier to train when they're young. I've told my husband it's different for rescues. Levi shouldn't be able to roam. He attacks other animals. So I think you, number one, should just go online and show your dog court cases and what they settle for when a dog attacks another dog.
Your husband, show him your husband, not
show your husband. Yes,
Lisa, the dog won't care.
Did they say it was $55,000 on the average case?
It's on average $55,000, but that's a dog to human bite.
Oh, okay.
It's a dog to human bite. Dog to dog, it's different, and it's pretty interesting. Well, I had a conversation with a client, but you're right. I mean, unless you go to civil, like a small claims court type of thing, because you can go for, what do you call it? Like, if they are property, right? So damaging property versus that. But yeah, definitely. And I mean, the ramifications of another dog attacking another animal is really not cool.
Awful
but anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. And I know here, and again, everything's different, but I know here, if your dog were to go out and pretty severely attack another dog, you can be deemed a dangerous dog, which means anytime your dog is outside, even in your own yard, they need to have a muzzle on. So, right, just educating your husband to the repercussions of that. I mean, before you even talk about training a recall, right? I mean, either you don't let him roam or you can pay for a fence.
Yeah, so that's good, Danette. Danette says she doesn't live close to neighbors with other dogs, but the thing is, practicing that behavior is still. I agree with you 100%, and not always. And yes, I would agree with you, Danette. Training a puppy is easier than training a rescue, but you can do both. I've done both, right?
Yeah, and I think the thing. Go ahead.
Too. I've had both, and I've been able to train for and get decent recalls and keep them from,
So the thing is that remember, with puppies, you have more neuroplasticity when they're younger versus when they're older, right? So it's no different than us. There was a really cool thing on YouTube called, if you go on our, YouTube, look up Smarter Every Day. And a while ago, I got caught on that. And I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but this guy, he does these different science experiments. And he did this one experiment called the backward bicycle. And the backward bicycle was, he tested how long it took his son, who was like 10 years old or so, how he could learn versus himself. So what he did was he took a bike and changed it so that when the steering wheel turned this way or the handlebars turned this way, the tire went that way and vice versa. So it was really cool to see that. And the child totally got it much quicker than the person with the other habits, right? Because remember, it skips that frontal cortex to go back to patterns, right? Our body wants those patterning. So it's really interesting. But it is true. And yes, you can train it. But remember, if you get an older dog who has those bad patterns or other behaviors that are undesirable, I should say, in order to fix that, you must set up management tools in place in order to get to that point, right? So, and that's why it works. If you're consistent and you have management tools in place, then you're less apt to rehearse those behaviors over and over again. We already know they're good at it. Why would we allow them to practice it?
Right. And this is why for Sue with Rambo and Sue with Van, those two dogs are young. So not allowing them to practice the the behaviors you don't want is important during this time while they're learning it, because it'll make it go quicker. I promise you. Right. So for example, this is where training collars come into play. So when Jive was a puppy, she loved to pull. I needed a training harness to get her not to pull so that I can eventually teach her while I was teaching her not to pull, right? I had to stop her from doing it so that I can practice, so I can train her not to walk nicely on a leash. And I have been there with you all. It took me 2 years to train that dog not to pull me.
He's a little persistent.
I'm like, oh my God. I'm a dog trainer, for crying out loud. I should be able to make this happen. And she's a dog that took the longest to train not to pull me. But I had to manage it until she was able. And for me, my criteria, I wanted to get rid of the harness and have her on a collar. Like that, for me, until I got there, I don't think I won't consider my dog trained, right? So I wanted to make sure she can walk nicely on a regular collar. So that to me is what my criteria was. Everybody's is different, but that's what I wanted. But it took me almost 2 years. She was almost 2 by the time she finally stopped wanting to drag me across the parking lot. But I also didn't let her practice it all the time either, because if I'm letting her pull sometimes, and then at other times I'm doing, it doesn't work. You have to not allow them to pull so that they don't practice it. And that's why good training is so important early on, because your dog, like us, we will default to the stuff we learned earlier on than the new stuff that we're learning now. So, and we have a tendency to fall back on our habits just like the dogs do. So when they're young, not allowing them to do that is really key. While you're training. And for those of us who had rescue dogs, it just took longer than it would have maybe if they were puppies, right?
Yep.
Yes. So yeah, Sue, the pulling. So you might have to put them on some kind of a training collar or a harness. Usually works well. And while you're working on teaching them not to pull. And then the other thing, when you bring him to the facility, that is a very stimulating environment for him. So you have to manage that nose, food on the nose while you're coming into the building, because he's too young to ask him to be able to do that without like losing. It's just a very stimulating environment. So it's hard. And he's very friendly. He likes everybody. But yeah, and so it might take you a while to get in the building. It did me in the beginning, because I would not let her pull me in the building because she wanted to do that all the time. So it's like, no. So you can't let them practice that behavior, right?
So I do have a video, if you want me to share this.
Yes.
I have a video of so this is little Timber. Don't mind me in my comfy clothes. You can tell I'm super fancy. But what I
share the screen.
I will.
Okay. You're prepping us. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm prepping. So this is Timber, and I do day school out of my house where I'll take and work the dogs for the day. And so we know Timber loves other dogs. So I had the dogs in crates, and I was reinforcing the dogs while working this guy. So splitting attention with the distraction, and this wasn't necessarily outside, but it was technically an outside situation for this guy. So I will pull this up. Oh, why do I hate this? How come it doesn't? What is happening?
Anyway, while Lisa's doing
Go ahead.
that, so go ahead. Just go ahead. Keep working on it. Once you get it, I'll be quiet. So one of the things that a couple things when you're working on some of the distractions, getting some of the behaviors in your house, like a good leave it command and a good recall, is key for working with distractions. And then eventually your yard, and then so on and so forth, right? So it's really important you get good, solid behaviors in the house, at home, before you try to go out into the world with it. It gets a lot more complicated if you try to do it all at once, right?
All right, sorry guys, let me figure this out.
Cool. Yep. So now we see your screen.
Yep.
So,
how do I? Hello.
oh my. So stop sharing.
Oh
Wow.
my God. Okay, that was awesome. Hold on.
It's a good thing we don't drink. We're not drinking on these calls.
Right. No.
Anyway,
Okay,
so
go ahead.
you definitely want to on the recalls. You definitely want to work on the long line in the beginning, but again, it would be in a less distracting environment, right? A long line, just so you have some control. And if the dog doesn't come, there's a consequence, right? You can go get them. If you just let the dog off leash and you don't have a recall, then guess what he's learning to do? Ignore you while you're screaming for him. So my beagle, I had a really good recall on my rescue beagle, but she wore a long line for a long time until I could trust that she was going to come back. And when she didn't come back, she got to come back. Like in Joanne's case, she did exactly what I would do. You don't come to me, I'm going to get you. And then I'm going to put you in my, you're going to go back in the crate or in the house.
My punishment box.
Your punishment box, right? So, right. So, but it's like, you don't get to keep running, and I'm not going to keep screaming after you to come and, so it's really important that you set, like you said, set up some management while you're doing the training, so they're not practicing that poor behavior.
Yeah, and like know the dog that you have as well, right? If you don't, go to somebody who can tell you and help you, because all of these things that we're talking about, they do work for every dog. However, right? Nancy was talking about her beagle, right? We all know, we think beagles follow their noses, right? If you have a dog who's super predatory, right? I mean, like, who was saying, Danette was talking about her shepherd likes to go off and kill things, right? So that's a pretty darn predatory shepherd that's probably looking for other things that are moving, right? That's not, I would be practicing like in my driveway or, in an asphalt parking lot long before I'm going to go into a wooded area or somewhere. I mean, I know squirrels and birds and all of that's everywhere, but see if you can minimize it the best you can. Because those dogs do take longer. They really, really do. And I know we mentioned this last week, 2 weeks ago, when we're talking about those good recalls, you have to get the recall in before they start that chase, right? Because once they're already in that predation mode, running after it, I had one dog in my lifetime that I could call off of a moving animal, right? It's hard. It's really hard when you have those dogs that fixate on and they're already started the chase.
Right. Right now, the only one that I can call off a moving animal is my lab. My shepherd, I don't know. I have a 50-50 on that one, but my lab's the only one I can call off of anything. But him,
watching him run past Cat, I don't know, because he was pretty darn focused on the moving thing.
Yes, he was. But my lab will come back no matter what. So Sue Poor asked, are you holding the long line or ready to step on it if needed? So Sue, I would be holding the long line in the beginning, because you're not letting him get to the end of that line. You would never let him get to the end of the line. You want him to drag it around, and you want to get those recalls and those leave-its before. You never let him get that leash check, right? You're never letting him get the leash check. You're teaching him just to come back without the leash checking him. Really, really important. Because if he's getting leash checked all the time, then he's going to wait for that leash check when he's free, and he's not going to have it. So you're going to teach him come, and the long line, you can have it in your hand, and you're going to pay him, but you're never letting the dog get to the end of the leash. The leash is really strictly there for safety. That's it. Just to make sure he doesn't run off. But you should behave as if he was off leash, right? Because you're never letting him get to the end of the leash. And it's going to
suicide squirrel. So yeah, Christy says if you're working and it's really good, you're outside, you can't always control things that happen, right? And suddenly the suicide squirrel drops a few feet in front of you. What's the recovery? Just add distance as quickly as possible. I feel like I'm dragging my dog behind me like a boat anchor. He's totally over threshold. I'm mortified. Yep, that's that moment to leave.
Yep.
Because there's nothing else to do. You are right. He's totally over threshold. There's no learning happening there. Get out and start over.
Right. So that's really an important piece, right? And it could happen it happens to anybody, right? Suicide squirrel. Yep. And there's a video that I found. This is a really, I kind of like this group up in Canada. They call McCann Dogs. They have some good training videos that I like. Kiko Pup, and I like these guys. I've been pretty pleased with what I've seen now, because sometimes I watch and you're like, oh my God, I can't even look at it. But well, Lisa, do you have the video? Did you find it?
I sent a copy to Joanne. I don't know if you can pull that up, because for whatever reason, I'm having a difficult time sharing that.
Okay.
Sorry.
You emailed it to me?
Yeah, I Facebook messaged it too.
Facebook message it to me. Okay.
Yes. I've heard of Kiko Pup.
Yeah, she's really good. So while Joanne looks that up, I'm going to show this. This is I'm pretty pleased. This is how you start. He's talking a lot, but I'm going to skip to the part where he's talking about how to start teaching your dog a really solid leave it, which is key and really important, right? So doing that, let's see. Why does this? Okay, hold on one second. I'm not sure why.
All right, I got Lisa's. So
okay. All right, so you see that video. He's talking a little bit.
There's not noises going on or other things, because we really want to allow our dogs to get focused on this thing first so that we can show them how to ignore it. Now, here's how I'm going to set this up. I'm going to take this item that I know my dog's going to be pretty interested in, and I'm just simply going to put it on the floor, okay? Now, I don't care if he sniffs it right now, because I do want his interest. If your dog is interested in other things, switch it out for something that's a little bit more interesting to him. Now, I'm going to place it on the floor, and I'm simply going to move a little bit further away. If I come back here, I'm going to encourage him to move with me. Now, here's what needs to happen. I need to have him take notice of what that distraction is, and then I need to give my command. Now, the command that I'm going to use is leave it. And leave it means look away from what you're looking at and check back in with me. It doesn't mean run away. It doesn't mean anything else. It simply means look back at me. Okay? Now, I am also going to use a little food so that he understands how to respond to that command. Now, two things are really important when I do this. I am not going to I'm not going to try and go as close as I can to that distraction, because to me, it's not about going as close as I can to that distraction. It's about teaching the dog to respond to the command in spite of that distraction. That's a very different approach. I'm going to work further away from this thing. So I'm going to get a little food in this situation. I'm going to put it in my left hand. Okay? I'm going to tell him, okay, and I'm going to take a couple of steps toward that container. The moment his eyes look in the direction of that container, I'm going to say leave it, and then I'm immediately going to put the food in his nose, and I'm going to turn him 180 degrees away and praise and reward him as we do. Okay, so real time, it looks like this. We're just going to move a little bit. Okay, he knows I have a little bit of food in my hand, but it's not on his nose. Okay, bud. Good boy. Now, he also knows I have a little food in my hand, so I'm going to make this a little harder. Good boy, good boy. Leave it. Yes, good boy. Hooray. Excellent. Good job. Excellent job, buddy. Good job. So I said leave it. I immediately put the food to his nose and used the food to turn him away. Now, it happened pretty quick with this dog. He moves quite quickly. But the one thing I want to highlight, and I'm going to do it again, is I'm not pulling on his leash at this point. I'm saying, here's the command, and here's how to respond to it. So I'm going to try it one more time. Okay, bud. Good. So I'm keeping the food away from his nose. Leave it. Yes, good boy. Excellent. Very good. Now I'm going to try it again. And if all is going well, I'm going to try and move a little closer to the distraction. Okay? Now, if I move closer and I say leave it, and my dog is so distracted by that thing that the food doesn't help them, you're just going to be patient. You're going to put that food in their nose and just create a little bit of space from the distraction, but resist the urge to pull on them and walk away with a tight leash. Okay? Again, we're still in the teaching phase. We'll test this in a minute. Leave it. Leave it. Yes, good boy. Excellent. Now try and go a little closer. Oh, he says, I know I've got food there, so leave it. Yes, good boy. Excellent.
All right. So this was a really quick, easy video, but you see what I mean about teaching the whatever command you're going to use. It doesn't have to be leave it. It could be whatever. But when you have to teach it in an environment where it's not so busy, like in your house, in your yard, where it's not crazy busy, so that you have that behavior. The younger your dog is, the quicker they're going to pick that up. And you could use here, you could use leave it. It doesn't matter what you use, but you want to teach them to start to come away from it and focus on you. And eventually you would obviously do away with food, but initially you're teaching him what that means. Leave it or here or come away from it that's what I mean. Come away from that. And be able to move away easily without pulling on the leash. And that's really an important piece, because I think if you're pulling on the leash, you've gone too far. It's too much, right? All right.
All right, Lisa.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I don't know why it doesn't do the same thing. I'm not sure, but I'm not technical.
Got it?
Yep.
Got it.
All right. I did not put sound on. Do you want sound?
Perfect. No, I don't.
Okay.
So this little guy, I know he likes dogs, and these guys are all working on how to be in crates with no big, whatever. So I toss the cookie away. I'm just working on him trying to stay with me. He's doing pretty good considering. But I've done a lot of pre-work with this dog, with this puppy. He's about 3 months here. And I'm giving everyone cookies for tolerating him being around in the crate. And he's doing pretty good considering I'm like not even watching him. But he's also hungry. So I think here I'm working some recalls with distraction, and I'm having him come to my hand. It's hard for him, especially with friends. But there he goes, right? And I tossed that guy a cookie because he tolerated the pup there. So this is a pretty, I don't know, I consider this pretty heavy, more advanced for the
Yes.
pup. But I've done a lot of work with this guy to get him to be to this point.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching a collar grab here to be able to call off of the other dogs. Now, mind you, he wants to play with other dogs.
So really quick, one of the things you want to notice about this video is the smooth body language of the dog. There's no tension. He's pretty relaxed. I mean, he's a pretty upright dog anyway, but he's pretty, there's not a lot of tension. He's excited and all that, but his body language is pretty soft. And that's what you're looking for, right? He wants to play, but he's making really good decisions easily. And that's the big key here. He's making the right choices easily. He'll get stuck occasionally, but it's a very short session, short time. So that's really important. And here it was a very short training session that Lisa was doing. So that's really important because it's like it doesn't take a super long time.
So that was trying to call him off of, I don't know if I had food or water in that bowl for him. So I was trying to do some distractions because his issue is that he does like to run off outside and they don't have a fence. So my recommendation was to do a long line so that when he does go outside, if he doesn't come, you have a safety measure for him.
Yep.
Okay, come here, little dude. I think that was it.
That was great. So, but that was really good. And so that was a really good demo on like how his body language is soft, and that McCann dogs, the body language of that dog was soft and relaxed. There's not a lot. It wasn't, if the dog is having difficulty giving you the behavior, don't move on. Just
Right.
keep working on it until you get that. And yeah, for that little dog, that level of distraction was up there.
Yeah, it was. We worked hard. We
Mhm.
did
No.
work hard.
So, Lisa alluded to the Follow Me game, Suzanne's Follow Me game. And some of you who train with us kind of know it already, but basically it's putting the onus on the dog to keep track of their handler. And that is a key and really, really important. Deb, I'll be honest, I use like a 30-foot when I'm working my 30 feet, like a big long, it's a super big long line, right? It's actually, I use my tracking line. This is what I use for that. When I'm teaching them to come when called and making sure I have control so that, and just to me, 30 feet is far enough away. I don't need them any further than that. So usually that's what I use. And I work on the Follow Me game. I might tie the leash to a tree, and so I have my hands are free, and teaching the dog to come when I call them, just while making sure they're safe. So, Lisa and I used to do those classes all the time. We don't as much anymore. I am doing them again, and I know Lisa's doing some on Saturdays again because the need is there. So we need to do it.
I mean, if you get a chance, and the other thing I tell people, go to places where they're enclosed and in a closed yard, right? So if you're in a closed yard, you can do it in your own yard,
Mhm.
and then you can set up different scents or whatever and work on that. I do it with my dogs in my yard. And then once we're able to do that, I'll take them out on the long line for whatever. For this little guy, because I know the further away he is, because he's more independent, he's a little Pomeranian Husky mix. He's a Pomsky, so he is more apt to be like, you don't have great ideas, see ya. So, I do a lot more long line work with him to teach him to follow me. In the yard, he's not super interested in doing it, but when we're out and there's no distraction, so like in the yard with other dogs, forget it. I'm lost. It's too much for him. He can't do that. When he's off leash and the dogs are out and off leash as well, he'll come if the other dogs come. And then how I treat that is if he's late to the party, I might give him 1 or 2 cookies the first or second time. But after that, I'm like, no way. Sorry, you're last. All the hors d'oeuvres are gone. Too bad. So, and then we go out to the other place when there's less distraction. And then I'll work with a dog who's more trained to be able to help with that, for him to set the pattern of behavior for more reliable behavior for that. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and I will say too, I have a neighbor. He doesn't have that dog anymore, but he was one of those ones. Whenever he would hear my dogs outside, he would let his dogs out, and his dogs were a fence. He had one dog that was a fence fighter, right?
That's
and
awesome.
So this was back when I had a different dog, and so he would be like, "Are you serious?" And then he would kind of walk over to the fence, and then he would go back at that dog. So I worked with him in the yard, right, on pretty great recalls, because as soon as I heard those dogs come, and we went inside, right? Well, then it got to the point where it's like every time my dogs went outside, he's let his dogs out. So I went over and talked to my neighbor, like,
Stop that.
I'm home for like 15 minutes. Can you let my dogs pee? And then I have to go to class. So just stop. Oh, sure. Anyway.
Well, that's a funny thing. So like Timber, the next door neighbor, the mother of the family that lives there, Timber will go outside to pee and she sees him and she like shakes the handle and he goes running. Like, that's terrible. Stop it. You need to talk to her, make her stop it. Because he's like, oh, I'm coming. Hi, because he's super social. And I'm like, that's terrible. So that's why I was like, attach him to the line.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. And then you wanna be able to get a lot of reliability, right?
Yes.
A lot of reliability, and making sure that that you're getting, your dog's your most important. And also, we like, with my lab, she's able to come out of play with
Mhm.
her friends, right? She'll play, but she comes out of play very easily. My shepherd has a little more difficult time doing that. He's much better now because he's almost 5 now, but it was difficult. You could see him like, okay, I want to come to mommy, but I'm having so much fun over here. So uh and calling off of dogs is usually the most challenging for most folks, especially like Deb Evans that lives in the city and all that stuff. It's a very, very um, busy place, and so there's distractions everywhere. So that's the challenge there, right? You're living already in a place where you can't get away from the challenges and all the distractions, and then you still have to train it. So it can be done, it's just going to take longer.
Mhm.
Like, in that situation, it's just going to take longer because you can't manage the situation enough, because the world does go, it goes on. And I'm going to tell you, it takes a lot of time. But
Mhm.
I think I worked on my recalls and coming here and to leave stuff alone, maybe, I don't know, for like 2 or 3 minutes a day, because I don't have a lot of time. I just was more consistent about it when they were younger, and and it worked out pretty well. Like, my dogs were pretty good at that. Um, so it doesn't take as long as you think. You just have to be real consistent, which is hard. Life gets in the way. You have families, kids, and things like that. But even if you do a couple of those things every so often, every day, even if it's a little bit. So, like that, working that leave it command, working a really good recall. If you do that a couple of times a day, when you go out into the world, your dog should be able to handle better, and you'll start to see some successes. And then when you do have some successes, don't go crazy, and then it's like, oh, let's go to downtown Chicago, because not going to work. You're really gonna, if you're in suburbia and you only see 1 or 2 dogs, and they do really good ignoring those dogs. Don't go to Lincoln Park in Chicago where there's 30 dogs in a block 1 block radius. You ain't gonna make it. It's not gonna be a good thing. So you have to build up to it, and slower is better, right? Uh, what else? Any other questions? I think we've covered most of it, but consistency is key. Doing the stimulus gradient for distracting the dogs is important, and the auto check-in. And again, I think you can find all that on Suzanne's website. I gave you the link for the paper, for the thresholds for the stimulus gradient. Um, yeah, and that's what I mean. It's really challenging when your dogs with the neighbors' dogs. Luckily, I had to actually did have to teach my dogs to. My neighbors' dogs bark at my dogs all the time. So my shepherd does not bark at them. My lab was actually the one that was fence fighting, and I taught her to. When I gave her a cookie once or twice, and she goes, "Oh, okay, leave them alone," because I want cookies more than I want to bark at dogs. Thank God. So I don't usually have too much of a problem with that. But yes, my neighbor's dogs they have a bunch of little Shih Tzus, and they tend to come out and bark at my dogs. However, my neighbors are wonderful. I'm very lucky. If they're barking and carrying on, they bring them in, or if they're watching them and keeping them quiet. So in my case, it's a good thing. My neighbors are very nice. Don't have the neighbor that lets the dogs out when my dogs are out. And then if they see that my dogs are out, they wait until my dogs come in, and then they let their dogs out. So they're pretty cool. That's pretty great that way. So not as much of a problem. Anyway, so distractions, it takes time, and that's what I mean. You want to do it before the weather gets so much better. Genetics. So Mary, that's so the question is, do you think training can ever overtake genetics, which pertains to distractors versus attention? Well, and I think what you're talking about genetics is prey drive, because that's where the distraction piece might become a problem. Yes, for distractions or being able to work around other dogs and come off of it, will definitely doable. But if your dog has a really high prey drive, it's always going to be there. So you're always going to have to manage that, especially when, other dogs or whatever. But yes, can you get them to come away from things or being able to leave things alone? Yes, it's just going to take a lot of training, and maturity as the dog gets older and all that. Because I know you
Right.
have young dogs, so yeah.
And it also takes a lot of really wanting to test the freedom. Don't do it until you have just such a solid, reliable, because if they make one bad decision, it'll set you back a big chunk. So, right.
Yes.
I mean, to me, and Mary, I haven't really met your puppy. I don't think he's a puppy anymore, but right. I mean, to me, when we have dogs that just really struggle with some things and we just want to see where we're at in training and we give them an off leash freedom, right? And they make a really bad decision. It really sets you back. So sometimes there are dogs who they can split their attention and they can do things and they just aren't reliable off leash. And that doesn't mean you won't get there, but there are dogs that are like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's like but you can get that reliability where they can ignore things.
Yes.
Even if even if your goal is never to be off leash, but that you're on leash
Right.
and that should be believed, that is on leash, being able to call off things and being absolutely, it's absolutely doable.
Yep,
Absolutely,
for sure.
it just takes time. Believe me, I had a beagle that had a nose on her that would have, and she had one of the best recalls. I worked it more than anything else in her life because I didn't want to lose her. But yes, I had to. That was a tough one. My the current dogs and dogs before her weren't as difficult, but she was a little tougher that way for sure. So we one of the things that we are doing more of, and I don't know if Joanne is at her place because I know Joanne's in North Island, but we are doing more outdoor training type stuff so that the people can set up that situation in a safe, under supervision to make sure that things are being that you're setting things up properly for your dog as the summer heats up. So if you want to visit our websites for your canine, the Canine Defined, and For Better For Worse to see what classes we have going on. I know we are doing some outside stuff to get the dogs ready for the summer because we're seeing trying to get ahead of the dog attacks and distraction work and all that, and trying to get ahead of that before it gets really warm, because we're seeing such a big problem. I know it's a problem where Joanne lives, a problem where we are. So, and I don't many places. So that's why I wanted to talk about distractions and kind of how to work on it. Don't rush it. Just start working on it little by little.
Yep. And I know for those of you who are trialing people, I don't have it listed yet, but one of the things that I'm doing is dogs that just go nuts in the car at other dogs or people, right? We're just going to have a little mini seminar on how to work on that because, right? Nothing like walking by a car and going, oh my God, what's in there? So.
True.
All
right.
outside stuff.
Yeah. And so, we've got a lot of lots and lots of other stuff coming up as well as we're trying to navigate the because we're Lisa and I are doing some online behavior stuff and nosework stuff. So stay tuned. It's coming. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.